6-ish.
6, I think. Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, and currently studying smicha in Israel, and it's always nice to have someone from Bnei Akiva return and speak to us. So and yeah, and also my Rosh Bet Midrash Leman Hayat. So very happy to have you back with us, Yossi. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nathan. It's strange to be on this side of things. It feels like almost yesterday I was the one giving the announcements at the Limud and handing out spare pencils from upstairs. So it's nice to know we've moved on a little bit since then.
We got better than pencils.
Yeah, we had some good stuff, right? With that, I'm just going to hit share screen. Right, can everyone see my screen? It's going a little bit slowly, sorry.
Yeah, we can see it.
We can see it.
You can see it. Okay, is it? Right, everyone. Right, now the problem is I can't see you. But okay, fine. So I guess if anyone has anything to say, then just unmute. So I'm going to assume everyone's listening. Otherwise, I'm just talking to myself. So first of all, thank you for having me. I just wanted to share an interesting idea I came across this week in a sefer that you may or may not have heard of called the Tzadok. The Tzadok is a sefer written by Tzadok HaCohen of Lublin, who was one of the more interesting Hasidic thinkers of the 19th century. One of the reasons he's so interesting is that he never had any kids, and therefore that's the reason his sefer on Parsha is called Tzadok, because he saw the Torah as his offspring. And it's a sefer I've tried to kind of get into a couple of times before and never quite caught what was going on. And then this week I finally understood a piece from the Tzadok. So I thought if I've understood it clearly, it's a sign that I'm supposed to share it. So we'll leave the title as a little bit intriguing for the moment. Ma'amad Har Sinai, when you're all zoomed out. And on the left, you can see a beautiful picture of what Har Sinai may have looked like had the Bnei Israel have wandered in the Yorkshire Dales as opposed to perhaps the Sinai Desert. There's something that's just come up on the chat. Sorry, I can't see what's going on here.
Don't worry. You're
okay. So I'm just going to carry on. Stop me if something doesn't make sense. So if I were to ask you, if you think of Ma'amad Har Sinai, the term Ma'amad Har Sinai is an interesting one because it implies something bigger than Ma'amad is like an event or the Sinai experience. And if I were to ask you what is the pivotal moment in that Sinai experience, that moment would probably be, it would probably be the moment Bnei Israel are standing there, getting the Asar Sadivros, getting the Torah from Hashem at Har Sinai. And traditionally, the focus of the entire Sinai experience has been on actually getting the Torah, right? And there's good reason for this. For example, on a theological basis, the Kuzari, Yehuda Levi, who is the kind of Jewish anti-philosopher of the medieval times, for him, Ma'amad Har Sinai, the experience of getting the Torah at Har Sinai in that experience of mass revelation, is basically the reason why we believe anything we believe in Judaism. Right, just to bring you a bit of a quote here, the way the Sefer is presented is very interesting. Rabbi Yehuda Levi presents it as a discussion between the king of Khuzar and various representatives from different religions. And when the Jewish representative is asked to present his opinion, he basically gives the Melech Khuzar, the king of Khuzar, a bit of a history lesson. And the king of Khuzar is surprised by this because he was really looking for a philosophical discussion. And Rabbi Yehuda Levi, in the voice of the Jewish representative, explains why he starts with this history lesson. And his basic approach is this, that unlike the Rambam, the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, thinks the only way we know God is through first-hand experience. So, for example, the reason why in the Asar Sadibros themselves it says, I am Hashem your God who brought you out of Mitzrayim, as opposed to I am Hashem who created the world, is because the Jewish people weren't around when the world was created, but they'd all, just experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim. And therefore, says the Kuzari in the bold here, Hashivosicha masha ani chayav bo v'chayavim bo kol Klal Yisrael. I, says the Jewish representative, I explain to you, King of Khuzar, what every Jew has to explain. Asher hisparei atzlam ha'ma'amad hahu b'r'osanei. That which was clear to them through Ma'amad, meaning Ma'amad Har Sinai, the getting the Torah on Har Sinai. Everyone saw that with their own eyes. V'achakach ha'kabbalah nimshachas shehi kamarihai. And after that, there's this kind of unbroken chain of tradition from that time until now. And therefore, says the Kuzari, the reason we basically believe anything in the Torah is true is because we all stood at Har Sinai and had that experience of mass revelation. So that's kind of a theological significance of mass revelation. In a slightly different way, that there's also a pragmatic or a practical significance to Ma'amad Har Sinai. This is born out of a Gemara we're about to see. So first of all, the psukim in Devarim, and if you've ever looked through Sefer Devarim doesn't really go in straight lines. It's a drasha from Moshe, and he starts talking about one thing, and then he starts talking about another, and intermittently there are like little pieces that seem a little bit out of place. And these two psukim in Parshas Kisavo are some of those psukim that seem a bit out of place. And the psukim say, "Vaydaber Moshe v'Kohanim haLevim al Kol Yisrael." Moshe and Kohanim, the Levim, say to Bnei Yisrael, "Haskis u'shma," pay attention and listen, Yisrael. Hayom hazeh niyesol am Hashem la'Hashem lakecha. Today you have become a people to Hashem your God, right? And therefore the psukim carry on. V'shamata b'kol Hashem lakecha. You should listen to the voice of Hashem your God. V'asisas kol es mitzosav. You shall do his mitzvos. Ve'estukav, and his statutes. Asher ani chametzav hayom. That which I'm commanding you today. Right? And the Gemara in Brachos points out the obvious problem. This pasuk is not being said on the day the Jewish people became a nation. This pasuk is being said at the end of 40 years of wandering in the desert. Right? Moshe is about to give them the tochacha, all the curses. They're almost poised to go into Eretz Yisrael. They didn't become a nation today. So what does the pasuk mean? Today you have become a nation. Right? This is the question the Gemara in Brachos asks. Right? And the Gemara in Brachos, Rabbi Yehuda explains, why are we saying this? It's to teach you that Torah should be beloved or is beloved to those who learn it every day, like the day it was given from or at Har Sinai. So we have in this Gemara, Ma'amad Har Sinai, that the moment of mass revelation at Matan Torah playing a different role, right? What this really means is that Torah was most loved on the day it was given, and therefore those feelings, the feelings we experienced during that mass revelation where we got the Torah from Hashem at Har Sinai, that's the paradigm for how we should feel when we're learning Torah. Right, and hence we have two kind of basic classic approaches to why Matan Torah is so significant. Matan Torah is significant because that's why we believe in God, and it's also significant for practical reasons, which is supposed to try and tap into the feelings that we had when we were standing at Har Sinai, and those are the feelings we should have when we're learning Torah. So it's almost like in the back of our minds when we're sitting and learning, we should have this image of mass revelation of us standing at Har Sinai getting the Torah. And to be honest, under normal circumstances, that's all very nice. The problem is, for the last nearly 12 months, we haven't really been doing very much mass anything, right? How do we relate to this idea of mass revelation in an age of social distancing, right? And in some ways, we try to to answer this question through the medium we're using now. We've tried to answer it by saying, well, we can't physically be together, but we'll just do everything on Zoom instead. And it'll be as if we're all in the same room together. But as we all know, after a while, that kind of doesn't work. You know, we realize that, you know, instead of me sitting in a room talking to all of you, you know, Baruch Hashem, we have the technology that I can talk to you from Israel, but right now I'm talking at a computer screen and I can't even see any of you while I'm giving this shiur. So how do we get that feeling, or can we even get that feeling of mass revelation in the present state that we're in? And what I'd like to suggest is a completely alternative approach to Mamad Har Sinai. Because until now, we've been discussing Mamad Har Sinai as the experience of receiving the Torah, right? But as we know, that wasn't the entire experience they had in Midbar Sinai, right? They got to Har Sinai already. They got to the area on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and they were there for nearly a week before they had Matan Torah. And what I'd like to suggest, based on Tzadok, which we're going to see in a moment, is that if we shift our emphasis from Matan Torah to an earlier point, there are some serious messages for us today where we can't experience mass revelation, but we can experience something much more personal that should bring us back to that moment of Mamad Har Sinai. Before we continue, everyone clear on what we're saying so far? Okay, I can't see anyone, so I'm going to assume everyone is smiling and nodding. Good.
We all have thumbs up.
You all have thumbs up, thank you. It's very difficult, this whole screen sharing business. I thought does anyone know if there's a way I can like get some people up on the side as well?
Yeah, at the side, you should be able to click view and then side-by-side gallery.
Yes, I think I've done that back. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Nathan. That's it. I'm normally on the receiving end of Zoom sharing. I don't often give them. So it's what? Now I've lost it again. You click. I have to click participants every time. That's annoying. Okay. So anyway, so as we were starting to say, the approach of Tzadok, not to diminish from anything we've said before, like the Chazari's point is still a very important point. The Gemara we saw in Brachas is still very important, but what the Chazari does is he draws our attention to a much earlier, much more personal experience that the Jewish people had, almost at the beginning of what we'll call Mamad Har Sinai. And if we can tap into that and kind of follow the thoughts of Tzadok through, I think there's some really important stuff for us today. So it goes like this. Instead of focusing on the Asher Dibros or the kind of the smoking mountain and that experience of standing by Har Sinai, let's have a look right at the beginning of the parasha. I mean, the parasha not as in Parashas Yisro, but the parasha in which we start talking about what's going to happen at Har Sinai. It's actually where we start leaning from on first Ishvos. The pasuk says as follows: "B'chodesh hashlishi," on the third month, let's say it's the Mitzrayim, the third month since the Jewish people came out of Mitzrayim, Bayom hazeh ba'u Midbar Sinai. On this day, they came to Midbar Sinai, the Sinai desert. Vayisru Refidim, and they came from Refidim. Vayavo Midbar Sinai, and they came to the Sinai desert. Vayachanu b'Midbar, and they camped in the desert. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged har, and Yisrael encamped opposite the mountain. And Tzadok points out there are a number of difficulties with this, right? The first one is something that Rashi points out. Why are we saying something about Bayom Hazeh on this day? It says Rashi at the bottom, Bayom Hazeh, Ela Bayom Hahu. The pasuk logically shouldn't have said on this day, it should have said on that day. This signifies that there's something really important going on. So Mahu Bayom Hazeh, what does it mean on this day? And Rashi tells us that the lesson the pasuk is trying to teach us. Sheyu divrei Torah chadashim alecha ki'ilu hayom nasnu. Now, the words of Torah, when you learn Torah, they should be new to you, like the day on which they were given. Could anyone see the problem with Rashi commenting this on this pasuk?
if you're saying this day in the present and then Rashi's commenting on it as if it's the past, is that the issue?
So that, I think that's less of an issue. Think about when is this happening? When is this pasuk taking place?
Wait, this is before Torah. 3 days before.
Exactly. This is before Matan Torah. So it doesn't really make any sense to say this day, the day you arrived in Har Sinai, is the. Are we defining the day they came to Har Sinai as the day they got the Torah? Presumably not. So question number one is what's Rashi talking about? And that is kind of our key point. Now, while we're on the subject of questions, we can probably point out a few other points here. Would anyone like to suggest any other questions?
Doesn't Rashi ask on V'yasum Refidim? They've already been there. Like the Torah's already told us that they were from Refidim. So why does it tell us that again? So that's one way of looking at it. Why are we saying V'yasum Refidim? Also, in the order of the psukim is wrong. If the Torah wanted to tell us they came from Refidim, that really should have been in pasuk Aleph, not pasuk Bet. Right? What do we say? They came to Midbar Sinai, and they traveled from Refidim, and they came to Midbar Sinai. But like we're going around in circles.
Also, another question: why do we need two different verbs? Vayisu, vayavo. Surely they just both mean going or traveling. Is there something distinctive about both those verbs?
Yeah, that could be a question. That does seem to be a bit of a pattern. If you Vayisu sounds more like traveling from, and Vayavo is coming to, but yeah, it does seem to be the same thing.
Don't we already have this, or not already? It's a question on, but this thing is also said in Devarim that you already quoted. Why do you need a pasuk to include these extra words twice in the Torah?
Right. So that would already indicate that what Rashi is trying to tell us here and what the Gemara told us before are slightly different things. One other point, and we've kind of mentioned it already. We said they came to Midbar Sinai, and they traveled from Refidim, and they came to Midbar Sinai, and they encamped in the Midbar. Like we seem to be like harking on about this Midbar constantly. Surely, if they've come to Midbar Sinai and they've come to Midbar Sinai, surely they're encamping in Midbar Sinai. Why do we keep repeating this? The last point is one of these, like, it's not a question until you see someone ask a question, and someone would only ask a question if they had a good answer for it. So I'll throw it out as a question, but it's not something any of us would have thought of, and it's definitely not something I thought of. Vayichansham Yisrael neged har. There seems to be something particular in the use of the word Yisrael, as opposed to Bnei Yisrael or Ha'am or something like that. So something to bear in mind is why we're using the word Yisrael. So just before we kind of start answering this, let's throw in one other interesting layer. Refidim, right? When you read the pasuk beforehand, what is Refidim? Or what would we assume Refidim is?
A place.
Presumably it's a place, right? And I'd have thought that's fairly self-explanatory, and no Gemara would ever want to tell me otherwise. Nevertheless, see an interesting Gemara in Sanhedrin, which actually questions this. The Gemara in Sanhedrin says, "My lashon Refidim." What is this word Refidim? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Refidim Shema. Rabbi Eliezer says Refidim is the name of the place, which okay, that seems fairly obvious. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Rabbi Yehoshua says, "Sherifu atzmon midivrei Torah." They became weak, or they weakened themselves from the words of Torah. Now, what does that mean? Especially considering why have they come to Midbar Sinai is to get the Torah, right? They have a couple of mitzvahs beforehand, but what's going on here, right? They were supposed to be learning and they didn't learn, and now the Sukkim feel the need to tell me before they got the Torah they weren't learning enough Torah. Like it's a very strange idea, Rabbi Yehoshua. So with all that in mind, I want to take you through the idea of the pre-Tzadok, the idea of Tzadok. And what he does is he essentially weaves what we'll call almost a meta-narrative into the psukim. He's going to explain to us what that first Rashi means, and he's going to show us how everything that follows in the psukim, we can't just read as a story, but it's telling us how to achieve the message that Rashi is giving us for the first pasuk. So we're going to try and, how long have we got? Got a little bit of time. We're going to try and read a few lines of this inside. Tzadok says, "Achein heim hadvarim she'amarnu." These are the ideas, and this is actually something he's referring back to an earlier piece that we haven't seen, where he mentions this idea. He says, "This is the point we were trying to make before." Shemarameis, what's Rashi trying to tell us? She'ikarhu, what is the main thing? The main thing is not that experience of mass revelation, and it's not even getting the Torah itself. The main idea that we're trying to learn here is hacheshek hagadol v'hatshuka chadasha b'chol yom lehischadros divrei Torah. What we're trying to achieve is not feelings and reminiscence of getting the Torah. We're trying to hark back to that cheshek, that new desire, and that shukah, that new longing for renewal in the words of Torah, right? And he proves this, and other Rishonim do so in different ways. The way Reb Tzadok explains it is this: that in Mitzrayim they were on the 49th level of Tumah, and they were very much connected to the challenges of Mitzrayim, which were like, let's just say, the worst kind of moral, sexual stuff that society had to offer. And Hashem comes along, and Hashem pulls them out of that place, of those desires. And then naturally, when the Jewish people are removed from those challenges, those barriers to Avodas Hashem, they naturally want to rush towards Hashem, right? And they have that desire. And that desire is something that's been building ever since they left Mitzrayim. The Tzadok brings a pasuk, Zacharti, the pasuk in Yirmiyah, Zacharti lo chesed nerayach. I remember the kindness of your youth. This is Hashem reminiscing about the Jewish people. Lech dich acharei b'midbar, you followed me into the Midbar. Meaning Hashem almost feels the love the Jewish people have for him when they came out of Mitzrayim. Also cheshek bo Midbar Sinai, and with that desire, with that longing, they came to Midbar Sinai. And that teaches us, that's taught to us, this is what Rashi was trying to say when he explained the word bayom hazeh. That when we approach learning, it should be with that same cheshek, that same desire as they had to receive the Torah on that day. And I think in some ways that's a lot more personal to us, because we can't really think about mass anything at the moment, but we can think about the idea of cheshek and desire, because desire fundamentally is something very personal. The question is, it's all very nice, but how do we achieve that? Because it's very easy to get dispirited. It's very easy not to want to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. How do we achieve that desire? And this is the genius of the Pri Tzadok. The Pri Tzadok reads this into the psukim that we just read. It says this: V'gam melamed osana, the Torah is teaching us eich lavo l'cheshek hazeh. How do we achieve this cheshek? And there are three ideas here, and these are the three ideas that I really want to focus on today. Say focus. We've only got about 10 minutes left, so this is kind of, if you don't remember anything else, remember these three ideas. It says v'al zeh nemar. This is why the pasuk went back and said vayisum refidim. They came out of Refidim. And bear in mind that Gemara we just saw in Sanhedrin. What was Refidim? According to Rabbi Yeshua, it was they weren't learning enough Torah. Their hands were weak from Torah. It says Rabbi Tzadok, what's the first thing we need to do to regain that desire for learning? We need to travel away, notice travel, from Ripu Yadayim, Shehu Atzlus, laziness. Right? It says Rabbi Tzadok, often when we think about desire, we think I'll be inspired and then I'll go out and do something, or then I'll go out and learn something. Rabbi Tzadok said it doesn't work like that. We can't sit around waiting to be inspired. We have to do something first. We have to get off our backsides and go out and do something, or open a sefer or something. And we can't wait for the inspiration to come to us. We have to go looking for that. So this is message number one. Don't wait for inspiration to strike. Idea number two, in order to regain or gain even a cheshek, our desire for learning Torah. The pasuk keeps talking about Midbar, right? They came to Midbar Sinai. They traveled from Refidim and they came to Midbar Sinai. They encamped in the Midbar. What is a Midbar? A Midbar is a place of peace and quiet and hefkerus, right? There's nothing, there's no distractions. If you really want to kind of develop a love for something. It's very hard to develop a love for something when there's so much noise and distractions around. And this is all the more true when and I don't know about you, I'm kind of stuck at home most of the time at the moment. And my kind of work-home life balance is a little bit off because, you know, I'm sitting at my dining room table and I'm working, and I'm also spending time with my wife and my daughter. So how do we balance that? How do we make sure that the learning is meaningful to us? Is that we need to find our midbar. We need to have that place and that time where we go where there's no other distractions, because we can't really desire something if we don't have the peace of mind and we can't appreciate what's going on, right? Here, the Tzadok uses the language. He says that the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his friends used to go out to deserts lispoded b'darkei Hashem, right? Hispodedus. Those of us familiar with Breslov Hasidus will know that hispodedus, kind of being alone, is a big deal by that. And that kind of self-reflection, I guess, in modern times, we might call it meditation. So lesson number 2, right? In order to, what have we said? In order to gain or regain our cheshek for learning, first of all, we have to go and do something, but we also have to make sure that we have the right space and the right time in which to do it. And lastly, and I think this is the most intriguing idea, says Rabbi Tzadok, why do we use the term Yisrael? And I can't say I fully understand this because I'm not a Kabbalist. He says the word Yisrael denotes Yisrael Mora al Bachinas Emes. There's some connection between the words, the terminology of Yisrael, and the idea of truth, right? We may be familiar with the idea that one of the essential midos of Yaakov Avinu was truth. Maybe it's connected to that, I don't know. Rabbi Tzadok says as follows: why were the Jewish people able to come to Har Sinai? They were able to dwell, as Rashi. I didn't quote this Rashi before, but I'm sure many of us are familiar with it. That we all came to Har Sinai like one man with one heart. Says Rabbi Tzadok, if you're coming in the pursuit of emes and in the pursuit of truth, everyone's on the same team. If I'm having an argument and my position, I stake my position because I feel that that's me, and you stake your position because that's you, and I'm defending my position because it's me, and you're defending yours because it's you, then we're going to have a real argument, and we're going to come out of that argument as enemies. But if we go into an argument both with the same goal, we're both trying to get to MS, right? And we realize that it's not about us at the end of the day, it's about the truth, then it's much easier to let go of our own positions, and it's much easier to detach the person from the position they're taking. And therefore, says Rabbi Tzadok, HaCohen, therefore, there wasn't any separation of hearts between them. All the Jewish people were on the same team. All the arguments we ever have, we only have arguments that end badly because we don't care about the truth. Right? If your goal in an argument is truth, then there's going to be shalom. Then you're going to be able to walk out of that argument and still be friends. And the question is this, and this is like a little bit interesting. What's the connection between the pursuit of truth and the ability to gain or regain cheshek for learning? And I think this is the idea. When you're thinking about truth, we realize that what we're talking about is not about us. It's not about you, right? If you think that learning and doing mitzvahs, and the only way you're going to have a desire for that is because it makes you feel good, then it's not going to happen. If we take a moment to remember that we're not in this practice, right? We didn't choose to be creative. We didn't, Torah mitzvahs is something that we have to do. Why do we have to do it? Because we're trying to bring Hashem into this world, right? We are shluchim of Hashem, right? We're agents of Hashem. And maybe that's not going to give us the desire, but it's certainly going to give us a heck of a lot of chizuk to carry on doing what we're doing. And I think these are really 3 key ideas to bear in mind during these strange times that we live in. Message number 1, don't wait for inspiration to strike. If you want to learn something, if you want to do mitzvahs, if you want to do anything at the moment, frankly, don't wait to be inspired. You've got to go out and do it. Second of all, find your midbar. You have to find a space and a time where you can think about it and you can understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And message number 3, it's not about us, right? We're not in it for us, we're in it for something greater. And I think if we bear these 3 ideas in mind, then we can really regain that cheshek, that learning, and that will prepare us for, please God, one day where we can be together again and we can really be prepared for reliving the Matan Torah experience of mass revelation, where we can all come together, as Rashi said before, ki ish echad v'lev echad. Questions or comments? And I'm going to stop sharing this. Anyone have any interesting or boring thoughts to share? Nope. Okay, stunned silence. So
Yeah, if no one has any questions, firstly, that means you've done a great job. You've explained it all so well. But also, thank you so much. Not only was it really, really interesting, it's also given us some important life lessons to take away. So thank you for that, and not well for life, and in particular for our next few months, hopefully no longer, but well, hopefully no longer in lockdown, but still useful for life. But yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, and yeah,
my pleasure. I will just say, if anyone wants to reuse any of this material, first of all, if anyone doesn't have any of my contact details, anything you can pass on, emails and stuff like that. The PowerPoint, and I have a separate source sheet that I emailed to David Rubin. So if anyone wants to reuse this, I'm thinking like, please God, maybe by Shavuos we can have Tikkun Shavuos again, and someone might want some interesting material. But you're welcome to reuse anything that's in September.
Yeah, and David's passed that on to us. So if anyone would like, and you're wondering who David Rubin is, you can just come to myself or Daniel, and we will pass it on to you if you'd like. But yes, thank you so much, Yossi. Really interesting, and thank you, and it was really nice to have you back in Bnei Akiva UK.
Likewise, well, good to be back. Please God in person one day soon.
Please God.
All right.
Keep
Anyway.